All right, guys, we need to talk a little more about frame generation and what it does for these next generation GPUs, like the 5060 Ti that I just picked up. Playing around with this card now for a couple of days. The experience that it brings for me, especially from an Nvidia standpoint, I would always run into like these stuttering problems and stuff, and I think I'm like right now I'm kind of testing this theory with when it comes to like 1% lows and stuff, you know, like massive frame time spikes and stuff that you get like while you would normally be playing video games. That kind of to me, it when it like stops and like freezes your game a little bit and stuff like that. I mean, it is annoying, trust and believe, like it is annoying, but it's not something that I sit and dwell on. Like it doesn't ruin my day, it doesn't ruin my experience. But I'll tell you what does actually enhance my experience is frame generation, because in my experience so far right now, testing the 5060, the 5070 Ti, the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte, I've found this generation of Nvidia GPUs to actually curtail or smooth out all of those freaking frame time spikes. They're not as noticeable, and I don't notice them as often. And maybe it's just all of a sudden developers and GPUs and everything are just completely fixed and they just don't have any problems anymore. But I would like to believe that it is the frame generation, because on games that there is no frame generation, I still experience those, 1% lows that will, interrupt the flow of the experience while I'm playing. Now, I know that everybody out there wants us to hate these technologies, especially like frame generation. And I've said it before in a previous video that, it's almost like a much improved G-Sync or FreeSync experience. Like even on the 9070 XT, utilizing frame generation or AMD's fluid motion frames or any of these types of technologies, it really does smooth out the experience to a point where you do not notice those inconsistencies anymore. Obviously, in certain games, it will introduce different things that you're gonna see, but I would much rather have a smoother feeling looking experience than worry about like some of the inconsistencies that frame generation can bring. Mostly I game on a controller, so I don't really notice a whole lot of extra latency or anything like that. I just don't. Like the controller mitigates every single bit of it almost, like to an extent to where it's like, this just feels good. Now, I will say that somebody in the comment section did once talk about trying to line things up, like the like lock picking or doing like really fine, doing like really like timed type stuff. I do every once in a while kind of notice that, but once I notice it and it's like and it gets into my subconscious or whatever, like my muscle memory will adapt to compensate for some of that thing. And that doesn't happen very often. It's only when you try to like with AMD, if I'm using regular frame generation and then I stack fluid motion frames on top of that will sometimes, depending on the game, add to that. Now if the game has good implementation of basic frame gen, then it's usually not a problem. But I will notice that the only time that I really ever notice that is when using AMD's fluid motion frames without frame generation in-game enabled, just due to the fact that like the in-game stuff has the motion vectors and all of that stuff already programmed into it. So when you look at a game like, say, like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I'll turn on the AMD's fluid motion frames with that game, and that one there will introduce, from 60 and like if I'm 60 frames or under, then you start to get that little bit of inconsistency where you have to kind of relearn like some of the muscle memory or something like that. But anything above that, like it really just does depend on base frame rate for the most part. You can essentially with the frame generation that's enabled in games that has motion vectors and stuff, you can go as low as 40 frames per second. You can, in terms of like filling and all of that stuff, you can go about 40 frames, enable that'll bump you up to about 80 frames. And then when you're running around in world, when you turn the camera, you'll notice like inconsistencies. I do think that frame generation is useful. I do not think frame generation is the boogeyman that a lot of people try to make it out to be. To me, it's like a superior form of like G-Sync or FreeSync, but for your 1% lows. I think it absolutely obliterates the 1% lows. I think it smooths out the experience to a point where it's like, you got to think about it. If you're in an open world game and you're just running straight, or you're getting from one destination to the other, you are 100% feeling like this, you're feeling like this experience that like it just looks smooth the whole time you're running. Obviously, the biggest thing with frame generation, my biggest pet peeve with frame generation period, is panning the camera fast. If I stop and I pan the camera fast, that's the only time I notice any of the inconsistencies that it brings to the table that we need to find a solution for. That's it. That's it. It's like the inconsistent like judder that sometimes you will perceive while you're panning the camera fast. If you're panning the camera slow, you don't see it. And that's fine for me. And this is why it works for me, is because when I'm running smooth, it's a smooth operation. When I'm stopping and when I'm like turning the camera, most of the time when I stop and I'm like admiring the visuals, I'm panning the camera slow anyways. So it doesn't even matter. Like I rarely notice it unless I'm like, but I do notice it when I'm turning the camera pretty fast. I don't necessarily see it as a super bad thing, my friends. I find frame generation to be quite interesting, especially now with this generation. It legitimately puts your entry level cards like a 5060 Ti, 5060. You know, it puts these in a different class. It really does. It helps you enjoy an experience that you normally wouldn't be able to get on a card of this class. It just does. It puts the experience. It puts the experience it makes the experience smoother, so that when you're playing around and you're in these games, your immersion is less likely to be broken over something like 1% lows or hard stutters, hard freezes, stuff like that. Like, you just don't notice this as much for some reason. Like, it really does improve the experience. So I'm probably going to be talking more about this over the coming days, over the coming weeks, as we get into more of the experience with the 5060 Ti. Obviously, my review for the 9060 XT will go live here in just a couple more days. So it's going to be quite interesting to see what you guys think about some of these technologies, especially on these entry level cards. So if you guys like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.